Hey guys, Jason up at the New 80s Revolution down here in the cave for a review, part one of a two-part review on my very close second favorite wrestling figure line, the WCW Galoob figures. These were wrestling figures released in 1990 and 1991 and representing for the first time the stars of the other federation, the number two federation in the world of wrestling at that time, WCW, World Championship Wrestling, which was slowly transitioning away from the National Wrestling Alliance tag, the NWA that I grew up with, the Saturday Night WTBS, Ric Flair NWA, was starting to morph into World Championship Wrestling and kind of drop the NWA moniker. And this is the first time that another organization, besides, AWA Remco, so we had figures for the WWF, we had figures for AWA. This is in the U.S. But WCW or NWA never really got into the game. There was some trickle down from the NWA into the AWA line, which we're going to talk about next, with Ric Flair and the Road Warriors and some NWA superstars that made their way into the Remco line. But WCW itself, NWA, never really jumped out into the figure market. And my guess is because they took themselves too seriously, or seriously. The NWA always presented itself as a no-nonsense wrestling organization and ran things a little bit differently than Vince McMahon and the WWF did. But around the turn of the 90s, WCW started taking on a little bit more of a character style. They got out of the Techwood Drive studios. The 605, the TBS Saturday Night 605 show started looking a little different around 1990. Late 89, early 1990, they went from that studio on Techwood Drive to, I think, Center Stage, maybe. It was like a bigger studio. It was almost like a sound stage. And I can't remember exactly where they went, but it was still not an arena, but it was bigger than that TBS studio that I grew up loving. So if you go back and you watch some transition episodes, in fact, I have the whole. I watched through the whole NWA/WCW series, I guess, from '85 to the close of Nitro. And right around 89, mid-89, there was a big angle where Ricky Steamboat returned to NWA and teamed with Eddie Gilbert as his mystery partner on WCW or NWA Saturday Night Championship Wrestling. And shortly thereafter, they made the leap to a different setting for the first time in a decade. Georgia Championship Wrestling was taped from that Techwood Drive studio. And we're talking 80, 81, 82. So for a decade, they were in that studio. And again, it's visually, it's so great. And if you watch the current NWA product on YouTube, that's exactly what it looked like. They've modernized it a bit with the current NWA, but they've nailed it. It's perfect. So it is fun to watch. But anyway, towards the end of '89, they start to embrace a more fun, I guess, family, kind of character-driven, not cartoony as the WWF, but they were starting to change from that, that southern, Georgia NWA wrestling to a more national product. And they started jumping into the merchandise world. Back in the early 80s, NWA had T-shirts. That's about all you could get from the NWA. They didn't have a magazine. They didn't have board games. They didn't have soap and Viewmaster reels. They didn't have any of that. They had some T-shirts. That's about what you could get, and I don't even know how you'd get them. Maybe at arenas, I assume, but I don't know how you would order. Maybe from magazines, but they weren't advertised very well. They weren't advertised on the show, that's for sure. But like I said, into the '90s they start embracing some of that merchandise, and with merchandise, what's better than an action figure line? And I remember, so 1990 is year one of the Hasbros. We had just gotten out of the LJNs. I was kind of going through my withdrawal of them. And Hasbros came out. And I bought the first series, and they were fine. But they moved. They had parts. And those parts got really loose really quickly. And they were really hollowy plastic. And they would make a lot of noise when you wrestled with them. And it just didn't feel right. I went from an 8-inch rubber figure to a 4-inch plasticky, hollow, articulated figure that I never got into the groove of. I never embraced Hasbros. Never did. And I remember watching a lot more WCW/NWA at the time and being extremely entertained by it and feeling less entertained by the WWF. And so I'd always kind of fantasized about a line of NWA figures. As you're a kid, you're sitting around and you're just dreaming about, all these matches that Ric Flair could be having. And I remember one Saturday night, 6:05 TBS, I was watching, and they would go to a commercial break. And as they went to a commercial break, they had sort of a bumper prior to the commercial. And I still remember the shock when they put up a carded figure of Arn Anderson and had some blurb about it. I don't remember, coming soon or WCW figures. I don't know what it was. But I was just staring at, the TV, seeing a carded Arn Anderson figure on this beautiful white card, and it looked a heck of a lot like Arn Anderson. And it wasn't as cartoony and bright as the Hasbros. And for a minute I felt like, oh man, this is going to be just as good as the LJNs. And I was so excited. I called my childhood best friend at the time, and screaming into the phone that it's finally happened. Our dreams have come true. The WCW is releasing figures. And that was a time when you didn't have rewind on your your cable system or whatever. So you didn't get to rewind it and watch the commercial and make sure you weren't dreaming. And you just hoped that in the next hour or so that they would show another little bumper, another little teaser for the figures. And you didn't have the internet, like I've said many times before on this channel, so you couldn't go Google WCW Galoob figures and when are they coming out. And again, it was the beauty of this time period. I found out that these figures existed by watching a commercial for them, and the anticipation, the excitement of who's going to be in the first series and who's going to come out and where are they going to be. It was awesome. And it's something that will never be duplicated. That those days are gone, But I've talked about that a lot. So anyway, let's the first series, 1990, was a U.S. release and a very poorly released set of figures. They were only available at Kmart initially. And so Kmart carried them, and so Kmart sold the majority of them. Kmart was the main supplier. And by the time a few other stores caught on, the demand for them was gone, for Series 1 anyway. So you see Series 1 at Kmart for a while. Everybody who's going to buy them buys them. And then Toys R Us and Woolworths. I remember Woolworths was a supplier of Galoobs. Woolworth finally catches on and starts carrying them. And they're not selling. So immediately they're discounted. And Series 1 fades out. We're going to talk about Series 1 today. And some memories, of course, of these figures. And then on the next episode, we will talk about Series 2, which ended up being a UK-only release. Not initially intended to be UK only, but was. And I don't know if that was a move that they thought would spike interest in the US, or, I don't know who got behind that move, but it eventually killed the line. And so we'll look at Series 2, the UK series, next episode. And then also during that episode, we're going to take a look at some prototypes. Some very nice prototypes that we're either going to, I would have to assume would be Series 3. Because Series 2 was deep. There were several figures. There were re-releases of Series 1 in different odd paint choices that we'll look at. And then there was a fresh batch of characters. And then we got some prototypes for Series 3. And like I said, we'll take a look at those at the end of the next episode. But first, Series 1. Series 1, I just love these figures. And I'm going to pull my favorite figure first. This is, without a doubt, my absolute favorite wrestling figure. How about that? This is not just my favorite Galoob, not just my, this is my favorite wrestling figure. LJNs, Remcos, Hasbros, doesn't matter. This Galoob Ric Flair, to me, is a 10 out of 10. This is an absolutely perfect figure. And I love it. Every figure came with a belt. And the belt is the same for all of the characters. It just says WCW right there on the belt. So every figure came with a belt. These are about, 3.5, 4 inches tall. About 4 inches, about the same size as Hasbro's. But again, this Ric Flair figure is absolutely perfect. And it is a figure, this is a line that I played with so much. And if you do the math, I'm a little older at the time. It's 1990, so I'm entering high school. I'm entering ninth grade, and still getting a ton of play out of these figures. So here is the Ric Flair. My second favorite figure of the line, again, is such a basic figure, but is perfect. I mean, this is a perfect figure. We've got the Arn Anderson figure. And you know what? I usually hate this play pose. I hated it for LJNs, but this was so great. I had so many. Arn Anderson did so many spine busters with this figure, and just such a great figure. Now this happens to be. There's two variants of this figure. There's one with a bald spot, and there's one without a bald spot. I happen to have the one without the bald spot. The crazy part is the bald spot is still there. It's just colored over. I don't know if you can see the texture difference there, but it's so, I don't know, for some reason they made one without hair there and one with. But again, the belts, you shouldn't even have the belts on, because you got to see the detail here. The double A on the trunks, the two-tone trunks. Just love this figure. Stocky, perfect figure. Just so great. I would have, this was before You know, I would have Arn Anderson take on Ric Flair a lot, just because the figures were perfect, and you could really play with them, and really have some fun with them. So, Arn Anderson, Ric Flair. Another figure that I used all the time was Sting. So here is the Series 1 WCW Sting. Great, great figure. I have nothing bad to say about any of Series 1. Series 2, I think, is a mess. And I'll save that for next episode. But here is the WCW Sting. Now, these belts, like I said, are very, very plain. In the commercial, and I'll try to scrounge up a pic of it right now, but in the commercial, the belts are beautiful. They're all molded after the big gold, the WCW big gold. That didn't happen. So we ended up getting these generic title belts. But that didn't stop anything. I mean, I was just happy to have a belt with every figure. Remember, I just came off the LJNs. You got a belt with Hogan. You got a belt with the tag team sets if you bought them as a tag team. So you're always scrounging for belts as a kid with the LJNs. The Galoobs, you get a belt with every guy. Every character gets a belt. Love the Stinger. You know, again, the Arn Anderson pose and the Lex Luger pose are similar, but different. The Lex Luger pose is bad. I don't like it. I don't understand it. I don't know why wrestling figure companies ever made a figure with this pose. I don't know if it's supposed to be like the flexing Lex Luger. I guess, but it's bad. Despite that, I played with this figure. I mean, despite any figure pose of any wrestling figure of our childhood, we played with. But this is my least favorite figure because of the pose. If his hands were just up a little bit more or in a different pose, this would have been a main figure because Lex Luger was a main character at the time in WCW. So we got our Lex Luger. We've got the Z-Man, Tom Zink. Great pose, and a lot of fun with him too. When you only have 12 figures in a line, and Series 2 never made it to no, I just called Siri when I said Series 2. Series 2 never made it to our land, to the U.S., and so you only had these. And so, like, Tom Zink would get a run as a main eventer taking on Ric Flair, because you got to do something with 12 figures. Great figure, the Z-Man Tom Zink. His partner at the time, Flying Brian Pillman. Also a tremendous figure with those Cincinnati Bengals trunks. Just so great. I don't have anything negative to say about these figures. This is my second favorite figure line. I mean, if these are a 10, the Remcos are a 9.9 for second favorite. But I just love these Galoobs. And I often get lost in the idea of what would have been. What could have been. Toy lines go, I mean, LJN went from 84 to 89, or arguably 89, or 85 to 89. So that's, good 4 or 5 years. Hasbro's went for a good 4 or 5 years. Mattel is going nuts with WWE. Jax was with them for a while. So it's not uncommon for Galoob back in the day to have stayed with WCW for 5 years. And that would have brought us into 1995, 1996. And what a roster we would have had of WCW Galoob figures had they kept the line. Oh, I'd probably still be playing with them today if 5 years worth of figures came out. Incredible idea. My other favorite, a big love this figure, love this guy, love the character. He was never really a character, but Barry Windham is in my top 5 of my favorite wrestlers. And this is a great, great, great bad guy Barry Windham figure. Why is he a bad guy? Because he's got a beard, and bad guys have beards. So this is when Barry Windham was a heel and was messing around with the Four Horsemen. This is slightly before his unfortunate Widowmaker gimmick in the WWF. Barry Windham very, very, very frequently played with Galoob figure. I love this figure. Also, these are all tremendous. We have Sid Vicious. And they really, they made him intimidating. This is just a great figure. This is a great, great, great figure line. I can't say enough about it. So we've got Sid. We've got a couple of tag teams that were released as tag teams and as singles. A tremendous tag team, figure-wise. The Steiners. What a great set of figures. These are perfect. I mean, they capture, Rick Steiner's stockiness. The amateur wrestling pose is there. The sculpt, the face, it's perfect. And you got at the time his baby-face brother, Scott Steiner. We know what he went on to look a little different than this, but Rick and Scott Steiner, great, great figures. And then a tag team that I never ever had as a kid. Just never got them, couldn't find them. I never saw them in stores. They just eluded me somehow, probably because I was never going to stores as I would today. But the tag team of Doom, Ron Simmons and Butch Reed. In fact, I never had Butch Reed until about a year ago when a fan of the channel sent him to me. So I got a Butch Reed. And so we got Ron Simmons and Butch Reed. Prior to this, they were masked. Doom was masked, all in black trunks, black masks, and it was their identities. This masked gimmick didn't last long because people started to know who they were. Ron Simmons has a very distinct voice, and people just knew who they were. And so the Doom started to get called out. And even Jim Ross on some commentary would say, he would give hints towards, who Doom was. And then when they were finally unmasked, they kind of sold it like, there's a big surprise, it's Doom. But never had these guys. Never had them, and they're great. Butch Reed is a tremendous figure. Tremendous play pose. Perfect figure. Ron Simmons, on the other hand, is not. I don't know. I just don't get this, and that's why I think, toys should have been made by kids. Or should have, kids should have had some input, because I can understand the adults going, well, Ron Simmons, he's very strong, and we've got, he does these muscular poses. But what is the point of fastening his arm to his side like that? What is the point of that? Is it supposed to be, some kind of a pose? Well, okay, but for an adult collector, I would understand that. But adult toy collecting wasn't really a thing in 1990. So you're making these for children to play with. And I'm not sure what they were thinking with this. I mean, this is like the Rick Rude Hasbro pose, which is just a terrible figure. So I probably wouldn't have done much with this figure as a kid, because it's so bad. It's it looks perfect. It looks great. His face is great. But it's just it's a bad figure. But anyway, so that's Series 1. Series 1 also came with a ring, which I do not have. I do not have the WCW Galoob ring. I did as a kid. It was a ring and cage, red cage, very, very, very similar to the San Francisco Toymakers ring and cage, but different, slightly different, but kind of the same. Slightly different, but kind of the same. I had it as a kid. It was great. I loved it. It had launchers. It had a weird... I'll pull up some pictures here for you. It had some weird launching mechanism, which I always hate with rings. But it was great. It was great. The problem with the ring was it was hard plastic, right? Like the Hasbro ring was a little softer plastic. It was a little muffled. The LJN ring was loud, but a little muffled. The Galoob ring was really hard plastic, and these figures are really hard plastic, rubbery stuff, and these are loud. So when I would actually skip. I owned the WCW Galoob ring, but I wouldn't use it. The ropes were flimsy. They were really, the ropes were really too thin, and the ring was just too hard, and it would make too much noise, and I almost felt like I was going to crack it. So I would use the Galoob figures in the Hasbro ring, and that worked perfectly. So that's Series 1. Now, Series 2, again, the next episode, I will do some of the carded Galoobs that I have. I have a championship belt. There's some bendies that are not made by Galoob, but came out around the same time. Have some similar carding. They're made by Just Toys. And we'll take a look at Series 2, the UK releases in the next episode. And then we'll look at some prototypes. And then we're going to dive into the Remcos. The Remcos I'm going to do something very special with. I've been talking to a lot of collectors on an AWA Remco Facebook group. And a lot of them have shared their collection, their photos with me. And so I'm gonna include some of their stuff, because there are Remco figures, there are AWA Remco figures that are $500, $600, $700, $800 figures. And obviously people out there have them. And I could easily find a stock photo, but I wanted to invite some collectors to show me some of their stuff. So I'm going to include some of their photos on the Remco collection videos. So that's it for Series 1. My second favorite figure line. Love these figures. Played with them a lot. Well into my teens. Probably when I should have been, looking for girls, or I don't know. I was playing with wrestling figures. And you wonder why I'm here today. But anyway, that's that. Thanks for hanging out with me. We got a new lighting system down here. I bought some lights. Hopefully it's a. I killed these dome lights that are always shining, right above my head in some of these videos. So I bought a couple of cheap studio lights, and they seem to be working out okay. And that's that, guys. Galoob, Series 1 in the books. We will talk about the next series on the next episode. And until then, good night.